All right. Good evening, council, staff, and members of the public. I'd like to go ahead and call to order the November 1st, 2021 Battleground City Council meeting. If you will all please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. Ready? Begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, if I can have the city clerk please take roll.
Mayor Cortez.
Here.
Deputy Mayor Johnson.
Yes, ma'am.
Councilmember Walters.
Yes.
Councilmember Bowman.
Yes.
Councilmember Davis.
Yes.
Councilmember DeRochers.
Here.
And Councilmember Munson.
Here.
All right, thank you. Council member reports. Council. All right, seeing nobody chime in, I will go ahead and move on to the mayor's report. Council, this evening, I just have two items for the mayor's report, and that's two proclamations I'd like to go ahead and read into record at this time. The first one is a proclamation of our nation's military. And so it starts out by saying, whereas our nation's military members represents the best of America. Generation after generation, men and women have answered the call to defend our country and our freedom, facing danger and uncertainty with uncommon courage. They make tremendous sacrifices by leaving their families to serve throughout the homeland and in combat contingency and in humanitarian operations worldwide. Whereas our nation's military members have always relied on their families for strength and support. Serving alongside our men and women in uniform are spouses, partners, siblings, parents, and children. These individuals personify the ideals of patriotism, pride, resilience, service above self, and honor. They endure the hardships and uncertainty of multiple relocations, extended trainings, and deployments because of their admirable devotion to our country and their loved ones in uniform. Now, therefore, I, Adrian Cortez, Mayor of Battleground, do hereby proclaim November 2021 as Military Families Month in the city of Battleground. I encourage all residents to acknowledge and honor the service, sacrifices, and contributions of military families for what they have done and for what they do every day to support our great nation. And then my second proclamation I'd like to read is for Native American Heritage Month. Whereas during National Native American Heritage Month, we celebrate the rich tapestry of Indigenous peoples and honor their sacrifices, which we recognize as inextricably woven into the history of this country. And whereas Native Americans are descendants of the original indigenous inhabitants of what is now the United States. Whereas Native Americans have moving stories of tragedy, triumph, and perseverance that need to be shared with future generations. Whereas Native Americans have enriched our heritage and continue to add to all aspects of our society through their generosity of culture and the continued practice of teaching economic, environmental, and cultural sustainability. Whereas our country is blessed by the character and strength exemplified by Native Americans who have answered the call of service in our armed forces in greater numbers per capita than any other group in the United States. We honor our Native Americans. We honor our Native American veterans and those who are service in active duty for their bravery and sacrifice. Whereas the city of Battleground renews its commitment to protecting the tribal sovereignty and the self-determination of Native American peoples. Whereas the City of Battleground is committed to engaging in dialogues led by tribal communities around the opportunities and work in which they are currently engaged in the areas of self-determination, sovereignty, and cultural preservation in order to create an active government-to-government collaboration. And whereas during the month of November, we honor our Native peoples in their ancestral homes, and recognize their continued contributions in strengthening the diversity of our society. Now, therefore, I, Adrian Cortez, Mayor of Battleground, do hereby proclaim November 2021 as Native American Heritage Month. And I encourage all citizens to join in this observation. And council, that concludes my mayor's report. Moving on to citizens communications. We'll go ahead and ask the city clerk if there has been any citizens communications that will be read into public record.
Yes, I received one email from Sabrina Worthy. She states, I would like to recommend that our City of Battleground Council work with our local tribes to create a land acknowledgement to be read before future meetings. Thank you, Sabrina Worthy.
Okay, thank you so much. All right, moving on to our consent agenda. Council, do I have a motion to approve our consent agenda as presented this evening?
So moved.
I have a motion by Deputy Mayor Johnson and a second by Councilmember Munson. If I can get the city clerk to please take a roll vote on this.
Councilmember Walters,
Yes.
Councilmember Bowman,
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Johnson,
Yes, ma'am.
Mayor Cortez,
Yes.
Councilmember Davis,
Yes.
Councilmember Rochers,
Yes.
and then Councilmember Munson.
Yes.
Thank you.
All right, consent agenda passes unanimously. Okay, moving on to our first item of business, council. This is going to be a public hearing. This is going to be on revenue sources. This is our fee schedule and property tax presentation. We are going to be presented with information and accept public testimony on the proposed fee schedule and property tax levy. I will go ahead and turn it over to our Finance and Information Services Director, Ms. Lowry, for the initial presentation.
Good evening, Council. Tonight, we will be presenting you with the fee schedule for 2022, which is Resolution 21-09. It is as was presented previously in previous study sessions. There will be, in addition, when it comes back for motion of the banner, or excuse me, the bricks portion of the bricks and banner portion, so the Veterans Memorial bricks and the fees associated with those. Those exist right now external to the fee schedule, but we're going to put them all in one spot and have it next to the banner program. So that will come forward at the next meeting for adoption. So tonight is strictly just a public hearing on the fee schedule. Then for our property tax, that is ordinance number 2021-21, and that sets our levy for our 2022 property taxes. It is presented currently at 1.64%, which is the 1% allowed, as well as our bank capacity from the previous year. However, if council, when we go to adopt this at the next meeting, chooses to go with a lesser amount, they may do so at that time. There will be more information presented at the next study session related to property taxes and information to go with that. So after that, this is just the public hearing.
Thank you, Ms. Lowry. Council, I'm going to go ahead and open up the public hearing and we'll take testimony. And then after that, I'll go and close it. And then we'll have some, if anybody wants to ask Megan any questions, you can go do it at that time. So at this time, I'd like to go ahead and open up the public hearing for our fee schedule and property tax levy rate. Please state your name for the record And let me start off with our city clerk. Do we have any comments to be read into the record on this item?
No, sir.
Okay. Anybody in the audience who would like to talk about this item? Okay, seeing none, I'll go ahead and close the public testimony, and we'll turn it over to you, council.
Ms.
Mayor
Lowry,
Johnson.
thank you. Thank you. Ms. Lowry, it looks like it's probably 3% across. Is that what I'm kind of getting?
Correct. It was taken from the CPI increase based upon July, what the average was over the last year, which was 3.4%.
Wonderful. So in the future, I know we're not talking about that now, but in the future, it's the CPI starts, is that January to January or how?
It's a 12-month rolling average. So if you do July to July, then it's July for the previous 12 months. And it's different points in time for that CPI. And there's also a month-to-month calculation as well. And it's based upon the West Coast CPI. So there's multiple CPIs out there. But we stuck with the rolling average because the month one was at 6% for 2 months in a row, which is an anomaly due to supply and demands. So the actual CPI is a little bit lower than that if you look at it in an actual 12-month rolling average.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Johnson. Councilmember Walters.
Just a question on the median home price that you quoted in there. I think you had it at like 327 or something close to that. Where did that number come from?
That's a great question. So there's multiple values when it comes to homes. There is the county assessor value, there is an appraisal value the banks do, and then there's the market value of what you're seeing homes being sold for. Those can be very different amounts. So where we got that information is we actually got a data download from the county assessor, and then we did a median based upon everything that the city collects property tax on, and that's where that home value comes from. So it's significantly lower than what you're seeing for what's actually on market. Eventually that market will come to play with the assessor, but it's a very slow roll with the assessor's office. It takes multiple years for them to get up to what you're seeing in the current.
Do you know how often they come out and do assessments, or is that a continuous thing that they do, or?
It's a complicated process on their side. They do a 3-year typical rolling average on each home where they'll do a more in-depth review. However, they do look at the market as a whole. Their ultimate goal is not to have peaks and valleys. So if they followed the true market of, like with the recession and then the increases and so forth, we would see drastic changes in the county assessed value and levy rates. However, what they try to do is they try to level it out and not have those peaks and valleys. So that's why they look at a longer period of time, like on each side of the market instead of a snapshot of what's going on right now.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Councilmember Walters. Anybody else? All right, seeing none, we will go ahead and have this on I believe it's on our next agenda, correct, Megan?
Correct.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, moving on to our next item. This is ordinance number 2021-29. This is the industrial pretreatment delegation. This will be a public hearing and potential motion. Council, we're going to be presented with information on the industrial pretreatment delegation by Mr. Hersig. Mark, turn it over to you.
Good evening, Council. With me tonight are Kristen Thomas and John Peterson with the Discovery Clean Water Alliance. We've presented a couple times now, so there's not any new information. The one thing I will add is the Clark Regional Board did review this, had their public hearing. And they recommended to move the final resolution for approval. So provided we don't have any significant changes, that will go to their board for approval on the November 9th meeting. So unless there's any questions, I recommend we go to the public hearing.
All All right, council, I'm going to go ahead and just like we did before, I'm going to open up the public hearing and then take testimony and then close the public hearing. And then we can go ahead and go around with any questions that you may have. So at this time, I'd like to go ahead and open up the public hearing for ordinance 2021-29. This is the industrial pretreatment delegation. And I'll start off with our city clerk. Do we have any comments to be read into record on this item?
No, sir, we don't.
Okay. Any members of the audience that are here tonight, would you like to speak on this item? Okay, hearing none, I'll go ahead and close our public hearing. And I will open it up to council for discussion. Council.
Mayor, I'd like to make a motion to adopt ordinance 2021-29 as presented.
Okay, I have a motion by Councilmember Munson on the floor. Do I have a second?
Second.
I have I apologize. Who did that second?
That was me.
Okay, I have a second by Councilmember Walters. Thank you. If I can get the city clerk to please take a roll call vote.
Councilmember Munson,
Yes.
Councilmember De Rochers,
Yes.
Councilmember Davis,
Yes.
Mayor Cortez,
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Johnson,
Yes, ma'am.
Councilmember Bowman,
Yes.
and Councilmember Walters.
Yes.
All right. Oops, I apologize. I believe we need the city clerk to please read the ordinance by title.
Ordinance number 2021-29, an ordinance of the city of Battleground providing for the implementation of a locally administered multi-jurisdictional pre-treatment program adopted by the Discovery Clean Water Alliance.
All right, thank you so much. All right, now moving forward, our next item of business is the ordinance 2021-30. This is the Sarkinen annexation. We're going to consider the proposed Sarkinen annexation of approximately 79 acres in the northeastern portion of the city. I will go ahead and turn it over to Mr. Crummett.
Good evening, council. I will share my screen for you. Well, I'm having trouble with my screen. That's okay. This is the Sarkinen annexation. This has gone before the council a few times. The public hearing was held on October 4th. We've since received the necessary documents to move forward with the ordinance. I'm requesting that the council adopt this ordinance, which would annex this territory.
Sam, it looks like your screen share just came up live. I'm not sure if you wanted to share anything additional on that.
I was just going to show the map of the property. Looks
Okay.
like we've got it going here. So yeah, this is the 79 acres south of Hyacinth Road, south of the Crystal Springs subdivision. Any questions?
All right, Sam, let's hold the questions until after we get through getting the city clerk to read the ordinance by title, so I don't forget again.
Ordinance number 2021-30, an ordinance of the city of Battleground, Washington, providing for the annexation of certain real property known as the Sarkinen annexation, subject to assumption of indebtedness and adopting pre-annexation zoning controls for such property.
Thank you so much. All right, council, please feel free to chime in with any questions. Deputy Mayor Johnson.
Sam, I think we've asked this before, but do you know how many wetland acres are in there?
I don't. I know that there's the Salmon Creek that runs through the property. There's a 100-foot buffer that extends on each side of Salmon Creek. I know the topography goes up quite a bit from the creek, so I don't have an exact calculation of critical areas, but I don't think there's a whole lot beyond the creek area.
So there's a good chance then that the parkland, what parks there will be inside there will run parallel with the creek then, since I assume 200 feet, 100 feet on either side is quite a bit of land. And it's R5, is that what I saw on your map?
Yes.
Okay. And is there already, the sewer already runs up Hyson Road, doesn't it, to Crystal Springs?
Yes. Mark Hersey could confirm that for me.
Yeah, you're correct. It runs kind of in that south subdivision, south of 10th Street, east of Grace, and then up into Crystal Springs.
And so the water runs along with it?
Correct.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Johnson. Anybody else? Okay, seeing none, council look to entertain a motion.
Motion to approve ordinance 2021-30 Sarkinen annexation as presented.
Thank you. I have a motion on the floor by Councilmember Walters. Do I have a second?
Second.
I have a second by Councilmember Munson. If I could get the city clerk to please take a roll call vote.
Mayor Cortez,
Yes.
Councilmember Walters,
Yes.
Councilmember Bowman,
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Johnson,
Yes, ma'am.
Councilmember Davis,
Yes.
Councilmember DeRocher,
Yes.
and Councilmember Munson.
Yes.
All right, ordinance passes unanimously. Okay, moving on to our next item. This is the Fire District Capital Facilities Plan and Impact Fees presentation. I will go ahead and turn this over to our Community Development Director, Sam Crummett. Sam, take it away.
Good evening again, Council. This is the Fire District Capital Facilities Plan update. It was last updated in 2017. The state's Growth Management Act says that we're required to have capital facility plans, including those for water, and later on you'll see our transportation and water. For the Fire District, we have Chief Scott Sorensen with us this evening and Fire Marshal Chris Drone. I'm going to turn it over to them to present the update.
Good evening, Council. So what we have for you is an update of this plan that was developed 5 years ago, approximately. Some things that have been going on since then. Our board requested of the County Council to adopt that plan for impact fees in the county portion of the district. That was denied, and since we've been continuing to work on that and hope to present that again in the future. This plan is based on anticipated growth, as well as increased costs to provide those capital facilities based on that growth. Chris has a presentation to show that outline those details.
All right. Good evening, Council. Can everyone see the PowerPoint there?
Yes.
Yes, thank you. Okay. So we've seen this before. This is basically an update of many of the same procedure we've used in the past. So this should be pretty brief, but we will have time after for any questions you may have.
Mr. Jerome, I don't know if you can hear, but your volume is really low, so I'm not sure if there's any way to increase it.
How's that? Is that any better?
A little bit.
Yeah. Okay, so the Fire Capital Facilities Plan outlines fire facility needs relating to growth projections of the district over the next 20 years. This plan determines what the future demand needs are based on future projected growth. The amount attributed to new growth is then used in the fire impact fee calculation to determine the fire impact fee for new development. It's important to remember that impact fees can only be assessed on the portion of cost attributed to that new growth. So district-wide growth, the district can be expected to grow by 46% in the next 20 years. Therefore, we can assume that 46% of the costs of fire impacts can be associated to that new growth. Now, we've broken this down to both city and county areas within the district. The city itself represents 66% of total residential growth and 92% of total commercial growth within our district. And the county, that represents about 34% of residential growth and only 8% of commercial growth at this time. So looking at the capital costs, basically the needs over the next 20 years, we're looking at an expenditure of approximately $22.6 million. Using that 46% growth factor, about $10.4 million of that can be attributed to that new growth. This chart here is available in the capital facilities plan itself if you want to take a closer look at it. And part of the plan, we look at an average call volume by land use. This helps us determine what types of structures and land use are receiving the most calls so we can assess fees fairly. So right now we're looking at 51% of calls going to single family, approximately 8% to multifamily, and 41% to commercial, to include industrial or institutional as well, so your healthcare facilities. So we put all that data together to provide an impact fee calculation. Basically that uses the projected costs, the land use percentages, and the projected growth to assess an impact fee to a project. What's new in this iteration of the CFP is the county. We're adding in their fair share. So you can see adjustment factors that we use in that formula to the right there. So here are some examples of what the proposed impact fees would be for 2022. To the left there is the city. Single-family homes would be $696 per home. Your multifamily apartment units would be $327 per unit, and commercial for a commercial project would be approximately 85 cents per square feet. And it works out to be almost the same at the county level. But as the chief spoke, we have yet to be successful in passing there, but we're optimistic in that front. So comparison through the history, the last time we actually got to update this was late 2017. I think it went into adoption in 2018. So we've had quite a few years in between then for those prices to go up. You can see the current single family fee is $555, multifamily is $248, and commercial is 59 cents per square foot. We then looked at the overall impact for a fire impact fee in the grand scheme of a permit holder using a single-family home as an example. So when you account for school, traffic, and park impact fee, the projected proposed fire impact fee represents approximately 5% piece of that pie. All right, with that, I will open it up for any questions.
All right, council. Deputy Mayor Johnson.
Chief, what's the county's main beef with not going along with this?
Well, they did not want to impose additional fees on development. That was the primary reason behind that. And then they also discussed the fact that if they approved it for us, they would have to do the same for other fire agencies. And that was the primary reasoning.
We've always, well, I say we, for the 10 years I've been here, and Mr. Bowman and the rest of the council, as long as they've been here, we've always believed, Mr. Mayor, as you know, in that new growth pays for growth. It doesn't seem very fair to ask all those folks who've been here for years to pitch in their part for the new folks that are coming. And so I find this to be a fair fee, if you will. And Ms. Lowry, last year, what was the dollar amount that came in on this? You have that off the top of your head?
I don't have that off the top of my head, but we are holding quite a chunk of change for them. I want to say we collected around 150,000.
Okay, well, I mean, I
Really
won't
speculating.
hold you to it. So any money collected in the city stays in the city. So where would, Chief, Mr. Drone, where's 150 going, would you say, this year?
So within the period of the plan, we anticipate a new station. We need a new station. And the current life of the apparatus, one of the engines will be reaching its life towards the end of the plan. And then we have other apparatus needs as well. So those costs are listed in the plan itself.
Okay, so our money's just thrown in with the other money that you collect.
It is, but this will be spent within the city boundaries.
And Ms. Lowry, does this have a best by date on it? Do they have to use it by a certain time, or can they just roll with it?
There is a 10-year expiration on all impact fees. So as you collect them, you have to expend them within 10 years, or they have to go back to the folks who paid it.
And so just not to get too deep into it, but so did they send receipts back to the city to show that money was spent within that time frame?
Much like the school district, the city would just be the intermediary. We would be collecting it and then distributing it to them. They would be responsible for compliance with the rest of that.
So we're just the pass-through people.
Correct.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Johnson. Anybody else? All right, seeing none. Thank you very much, Chief and Mr. Drone, for this presentation. All right, council, moving on to our transportation system plan. This will be a presentation this evening. Mark Hersig will go ahead and kick it off. Mark?
Good evening, council. Give me a second to share my screen. All right, tonight we're going to talk about the transportation system plan update. I also have Matt Hugart with Kittleson Associates with me, and he's the one that helped put together the plan. What we're going to talk about tonight is why we're doing this. We'll talk about the different chapters and appendices, what the Planning Commission decided, a summary, and then we can answer any questions. So why are we doing this? So the land use master plan was completed recently, and it provided some changes to the urban growth boundaries. So this plan accommodates those urban growth boundary proposed changes. And then this also did a full update to the plan. So we last did a full update in 2005, and we had partial updates in 2009 and 2015. So this essentially provided a full update. Chapter 1 of the plan deals with the planning context. So it addressed goals and objectives. There were essentially 8 goals and objectives that were addressed. The basis of those goals were from the comp plan. The TSP also addressed the regulatory issues. So transportation plans required under GMA. It addresses the city's inventory, which is included in Appendix A of the plan. Addresses the city's level of service standards. And so when we look at level of service, we look at it from an intersection basis. So if you have a signalized intersection, we require a level of service of D. Unsignalized requires a level of service E. And those standards are adopted by our code. And then the additional items here, the needs, traffic forecasts, pedestrian and bike component, TDM strategies, and financing were addressed in the remaining chapters. Chapter 2 addressed the multimodal system plan. It addressed functional classifications. That's essentially a hierarchy of the roads in the city. All your collectors and arterials are shown in the system map in the plan. And those are the roads that we require to be built as development comes in. Anything lower than that, essentially your local roads, those are designed based on the city's code. And so those kind of can move around, but essentially the higher classification streets are what's required for sure. Discusses access management. That's also addressed in the code. And essentially you have less access as the functional classification grows. So local streets, you can have driveways everywhere, whereas arterials, you only have typically street connections, and those are spread fairly far apart. It addressed our truck routes. Those again are adopted in the code, and the transportation plan contains the map. Addresses the bicycle system in the city of Battleground. That's essentially done through bike lanes, shared traffic and bike lanes, and then shared use paths. For the pedestrian system, that's typically done through sidewalks or the shared use paths. It addresses public transportation, which is provided by C-Tran. There's a project list, both near and long term, and then transportation demand management is addressed. Chapter 3 is the implementation plan. So there's revenue and expenditures. There's a list of sources, which includes your typical traffic impact fee grants. The expenditures focuses on the capital. The cost summary, so there's approximately 382.9 million worth of roads in it. The vast majority of those will get done by development. Very little is covered by either grants or traffic impact fees. So most of that will get built when developers come in. There's a list of potential sources that includes TBD, bonds, et cetera. And then the traffic impact fee, once this plan is adopted, we'll look at that and see if that needs to be updated based on new cost and those sorts of things. Then you have 2 appendices. One is the existing inventory that I mentioned. And then we included some conceptual drawings for SR 503. The goal of the conceptual drawings is trying to get similar to what you see on 502. The goal is beautification and trying to slow speeds down. So they include medians and those sorts of things to try to give you the feel of what you see along 502. This was reviewed with the Planning Commission. They approved it with the modifications below. Their first modification was to reorganize the TDM table. So while we didn't have it any particular order, their thought was that because when a user or somebody, a reader looks at it, they tend to think that what's on top is the most important. They decided they wanted to organize that. So their most important was parking management, followed by connectivity, and then items related to bike and peds. So those items were put towards the top, and that table was reorganized, as you can see there on the right. The other thing they wanted to do was add an Old Town couplet study to the projects list. I think we've talked about that before, but there's an idea that to help the traffic through East Main Street, it might make sense to provide a couplet where you would go one direction on one street and then the traffic on the other street would go the other direction. So we'll be adding that to the projects list. The only other comment was a discussion about the truck route on East Main. There was a question if that should be eliminated. We looked into it and it's currently a truck route based on the state system. So I'm still researching if that's even an option to eliminate from that. I don't believe it has much impact on the plan. It's kind of a separate issue that got brought up because the truck route map is there. But it's just something they wanted us to look into. So kind of in summary, we have a fully updated plan and it is state law compliant, which essentially means it's compliant with GMA. Be happy to answer any questions and I'll stop sharing my screen. I can figure out how to do that.
Can do it for you, I think.
It's a beautiful picture.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. Councilmember Bowman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mark, if we eliminate that truck route on East Main, how does that affect Anderson down at the bottling facility?
It's a good question. So the way truck routes work is if you're on a truck route, you can make any truck related trip on that route. If you aren't on a truck route, you have to make the shortest distance that's necessary to either accomplish your goal or what have you. So in that particular case, Grace would be a truck route. So they would have to go north or south to, I believe, Eaton on the south side. And then I believe it's all the way up to 249th on the north side to essentially get out of town. So it would be a significant alternate path they would have to take.
And if they were coming from, if they're coming from the milk plant there on Main and Southeast First, or that'd be Southeast First, right?
Correct.
And they were going over to the bottling, or bringing bottling trucks, where the bottling manufacturing plant is over by the skate park. How would they do that?
I believe because that's the shortest path and there isn't a direct route, they could still take Main Street. So eliminating that wouldn't have a change, a change on that.
How many other trucks do we get coming through town that go, in your opinion, that are coming through there? We do have, the other issue we do have though is we have truck parking down there on that end of town with Rick Lewis's stuff back in there. There is some truck parking back in there. So how do those trucks get in and out of there without making it worse?
It's a good question. So definitely not my recommendation to remove it. The concern makes sense to me. We're trying, you ultimately want to encourage Old Town and have that more pedestrian and feel. Right now, I don't think there's good alternate solutions. You also have Tappanee down there with their, yard and stuff like that. So I think there's some complications to it, and that might be why the couplet study is a good idea, because there could be various solutions to getting truck traffic off of the main corridor, maybe on, if you used First Street on both sides, maybe make that the truck route, leave actual Main Street. To answer your other question, there are quite a few trucks that come from east of town. I don't have the exact numbers, but I believe that route's a T3 route, which is kind of middle of the road. So your if I have my order correct, T1s are like your interstates where they have the most traffic, then T5's the lowest, and I believe Main Street's a T3. So based on that, it gets a pretty kind of middle of the road amount of traffic, which is more of it's coming from the city. There's a lot from the outside as well.
Okay, thank you.
Mark, if I could.
Councilmember Walters.
Hi, sorry, this is Matt Hugart with Kittleson. If I could add one more thing to this discussion.
Matt, if you could just hang on, we're just having council discussion right now, so.
Oh, okay, sorry, I just sort of acting as an extension of Mark here as
Yeah.
an author of the TSP. Is it okay if I just add one comment?
Go ahead.
Sure. I just, before we get off topic, when we put the TSP together and we kept that truck identification plan in the document, because we left certain roadways on with the truck designation, it doesn't necessarily mean that trucks can't drive on those facilities. I think from a policy perspective, I think you can look at it from the idea of if that roadway were to ever be improved or investigated for changes, having the truck designation on it allows you to continue to design and plan for those certain kinds of vehicles. If you were to remove it, then at the policy level, if and when a project is ever done to consider improvements to that corridor or to that roadway, then you would not be designing for certain trucks into the future. So just because the designation is there doesn't mean you're categorically excluding anything. It just means that at a policy level, you might be designing for it or not for it at some point in the future. So just wanted to throw that out there.
Thank you, Matt, for that clarification. Councilmember Walters.
So I just have a question about the traffic signals on West Main 502 at 15th Avenue. Who controls those traffic lights?
WashDOT.
WashDOT does.
Correct.
So we've had multiple traffic collisions in that area over the last couple of months. People turning into Dutch Bros, and since Dutch Bros has been in there, it seems to have increased the instances of those accidents. And I'm wondering if it would be possible to contact them about getting some solid green lights instead of the not solid, but the green arrows for making turns on both sides, on the Fred Meyer side and on the side coming out the south side as well. Is that possible? Is there anything that can be done on our end to make that a safer intersection?
Yeah, so one of the projects that we have with the 503, 502 congestion relief is to help improve that intersection. One of the things we'll be doing is adding an additional left turn in the southbound direction. As part of that, the signal head should get updated and the timing will as well. So that should help address that issue. With the change at 12th, that's added a lot of new traffic over there. So I think that's kind of part of the issue, and that project will help address it. So I believe that should take care of it, at least to a degree.
And when is that projected to happen?
It should hopefully be under construction next year.
Okay. And there's nothing we can do as far as the signals at this point then, or
I can
the
always
capability is there, because I've seen it. I've seen the green arrows at times, but I don't know what their time period is to have that happen. But most often we see the flashing yellow light or the solid green light. And I think that's definitely confusing a lot of drivers.
Yeah, I can put that request into them. I'll also grab the accident reports from what's happened and send them that way. I haven't looked at them, so I'm not sure what the cause of the accidents have been, but we can send that information over to them and have them look at it.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember DeRochers.
Yeah, I'm trying to find the truck map in the paperwork, the packet. Is it in there? And did it change at all?
Give me a second. It's called the Motorized Freight Plan, and it's page 25 of the plan.
Okay. Is there a link to that in our packet?
Yeah, it was attached to the packet.
Okay. Because it just pulls up the 700 and something pages. So
Yeah.
anyways, it didn't change, right?
No, it matches what's in the code.
So it's still going up 239th to go around from the north on 503, 242nd, I think, to 239th.
Correct, over on the west side. Yeah, so
Okay.
if you have our PDF packet, it's page 282.
Oh, thank you. Okay, I just wanted to make sure that didn't change. I got a little paranoid.
Yeah, it should match what's in the code, and then the blue ones on the map are kind of what happens outside in the county.
Perfect, looks good. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember DeRochers. Anybody else?
Mayor, if you
Councilmember
don't
Munson.
mind. Yeah, thank you, Mayor Cortez. Mark, quick question, well, two quick questions. How's our relationship with our WashDOT liaison? Have relations improved over what we had a few years ago?
It depends. I had a argument with them today. So some days it's good, some days it's dependent. So, we meet on a every other month basis to talk about issues in the city. I felt at times that, we've made good progress towards things, but there's been a few things that I just quite frankly don't agree with recently. So we've discussed some of those today, and I'll be filling Aaron in later to, have some further discussions about that.
Okay, I'm not trying to set you up here. There is a reason for it. We're starting to connect into their 503 a lot more. We had the Fred Meyer's entrance there on the north end of Freddy's. Now we're looking at Rasmussen's going to be connecting here pretty soon. So I'm curious, how involved in discussion are they with you as we look at our transportation system plan update? How involved are they at looking at that core area and addressing situations there? Have they been talking about decreased speeds? What kind of conversations are we having? Because
Sure,
as we develop our plan, I want to see if it's time, maybe they come to one of our meetings and have a discussion with us about how they're impacting us.
Yeah, so this plan was provided to them, and that's honestly part of the discussion I was having today, the kind of continued issue with Rasmussen and the signalization of it. They're working on a corridor plan for 503 that we're supposed to be involved in, and part of that process is to sort of come to an agreement on where we have access, what that access looks like, how that goes about, what the corridor looks like you said, the cross section, those sorts of things. So they've got that scheduled for early next year, and I think it will take about 6 to 9 months. But the basis was supposed to be part of based on this transportation plan. So there have been discussions that it's moving slower than I would like it to, but they're still at the table at this point.
Okay, thank you. One last thing, Aaron. I know a couple years ago, I remember Deputy Mayor Johnson asking for them to come talk to us about some of these projects, and we haven't had a visit from them. I would like to see them come talk to us, especially if Mark is having some heartburn the way he is, because we are connecting to them, they're connected to us. I would really think that they should come to one of our meetings if they're going to have discussions on what's going to happen. At least that's my opinion. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Anybody else? Deputy Mayor Johnson.
I will second that, Mr. Munson. Mark, we're roughly 4 years into 502, 503, the part we've done. What does the city, has it improved traffic flow? Has it done what we thought it was going to do?
Yeah, at this point, until the project's done, what we're seeing is you've improved traffic flow in certain places, and it's kind of shifted it to the other areas that are essentially part of the second half of the projects. So once those projects get done, it should be a lot smoother, because it very much has improved what we've done. It's just waiting on those last few projects.
Anywhere in any of these plans, and I looked through them, didn't see any, but I might have missed it. Are there any roundabouts scheduled anywhere?
Matt, do you recall off the top of your head?
No, I don't believe there's any roundabouts listed.
Okay, I actually prefer roundabouts, but there are those that don't. And then lastly, riding with Mr. Munson again, using the transportation metaphor, traffic speeds still irritate me greatly. You can do 35 at Dollar's Corner in the middle of a rural zone, yet you can cross the main street at 55. It's 45 down where the dairy is in Orchards, and it's 55 on Main Street. It makes little rhyme and no reason. And so along with Mr. Munson, I would say it's time that we ask them to come up, and I'm sure they have traffic studies. And again, those of us that have been here know it's their goal to move traffic. They've told us that over and over. Their goal is to move traffic. I honestly, to my friends in Amboy and Yacolt, I don't care if they get home 5 minutes quicker. Matter of fact, they can hang out for 10 minutes longer as far as I'm concerned. I'm concerned again, as I've been down on the corner here in the last month or so, when you watch traffic cross over there and with people trying to cross the street, pardon the term, but it's damn dangerous. And we have little respect as drivers for pedestrians in this city, which the cops should pay closer attention, in my estimation, that pedestrians here take their lives in their hands. I hate to say it that way, but that's the truth, and everyone in the city knows. So I hope when we work with them on this, that we can impress upon them that we slow down the traffic on the north and southbound route. I don't get it. For the years that I talked with them, they just were flat out saying no can do. They want people to get home in Yacolt, Amboy, and Cooper. So I hope that we will at some point kind of stick our foot down and say, hey, at 189th out to 249th, that's the city of Battleground. You may own the highway, but we own the city limits. And so I'm hoping that we can do that somewhere along the line. We can find the gumption to do that. So thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll get off my soapbox now and move along. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Thank you, Deputy Mayor Johnson. Anybody else? All right, seeing none. Thank you, Mr. Hersig, for that presentation. But don't go far. Moving on to our next item on the agenda. This is our water system plan. This will be a presentation presented by Mr. Hersig.
Give me 1 second to get my water stuff up. All right, here we go. Let me share my screen. Theoretically, give me a second. All right, here we go. So tonight, I'm going to talk to you about the water system plan update. Similar to the previous, I'll talk to you about why the chapters and appendices, the decision from the Planning Commission, summary, and questions. Reason for doing the water system plan is based on state law. When we approved our last one, it was valid for 6 years. And so our previous plan was adopted in 2014, which put it to 2020. So last year we started the update of the plan as required. Good news is that new approvals are good for 10 years. So once this one is approved, we won't have to do it again for that long. Chapter 1 is an introduction. So it's an intro to our system. There's an overview of the existing system and some just interesting stats I found. So our service population, which is actually smaller than our city population, is about 19,000. At the time, and data we're using is from 2019, we had 5,900 connections. Consumption was at 480 million gallons. We had 85 miles of water main, and we have 6 reservoirs totaling 3.84 million gallons. The remainder of the chapter talks about definitions and acronyms. Chapter 2 is the water system description. So it talks about our water service area. As you probably know, the water service area doesn't match the city limits. We're essentially most of what's north of Eaton, and then we go decently out west of the current city limits. CPU serves everything else around it. There's the inventory and details about each of our wells, boosters, and reservoirs. There's discussion about the agreements that we have in place and description of adjacent systems. Chapter 3 is land use and population. Plan is compatible with other plans in GMA. There's a discussion about land use, and then there's a projection of our water system population. So the plan projects about 28,000 in 2030 and a little over or almost 41,000 in 2040. Chapter 4 discusses water demands. So it's what our water needs are and who uses it. It discusses our largest water users. As you can see in the table, Battleground Mobile Estates was the largest user at a little more than 8.5 million gallons. The reason for that is they have 1 meter for the entire park, and there's about 189 units in there. So when you do the math, they actually use significantly less than a typical house per unit, which is what's expected. But based on them having 1 meter, they are the largest user. There's discussion about distribution system leakage. That's essentially the water so you have meters on your production sources and then meters for all your customers. And that difference is considered the distribution system leakage. You're required by the state to have less than 10%. And in 2019, ours was at 7.4. So easily meeting the state requirement. There's a discussion about average and maximum day demand. Average is essentially what you use on a daily basis, and then max day is what you use on your worst day of the year. In 2030, that's projected to be out 2,900 gallons per minute. Average for that same time period would be 1,600. And then in 2040, it's almost 4,200 gallons per minute, where average day in the same time frame would be 2,300. So you can see that on our hot days, we're using almost double the amount of water, and a lot of that going to irrigation, those sorts of things. And then there's the ERU projections for the system. Chapter 5 are our policies and design criteria. We address the policies that are required to be addressed by Department of Health. There's listing of how we deal with complaints, and then a list of all our construction standards. Chapter 6 is water source and quality. We have our existing sources. Where do our water come from? We talk about our water rights, and I won't go into a lot of detail about the water rights, but essentially we have sufficient water rights for our system and for future growth. The consultant went into an alternatives analysis, so they reviewed 8 different alternatives. The 4 that kind of came to the top were working with CPU on their sources, such as Paradise Point, maximizing our water rights and our shallow aquifer. So our smaller wells are in a shallow aquifer that has a little bit better water. It's not as much, but we don't have the iron issues that we have in the deeper aquifer. Third one was to bring well 6 back online. And then the 4th was to replace well 7 and 8 if technology allows. And there was a sub option to that is work with CPU on other locations in the same aquifer. And then we discussed testing and water quality. Chapter 7 is the water system analysis. So they did an analysis of our production. You can see in 2030, we need about, for our max day demand, we need 2,901 gallons per minute. With the addition of the transmission main from Paradise Point and an upgrade at the intertie, we'll be able to get 4,000 gallons per minute from that. That will easily meet the 2,900 we need. And then in 2040, we need about 4,200, and that same improvement at year 2030 would cover that. They additionally looked at our storage evaluation, and then similar to what we've had in the previous plan, we need another 1.5 million gallon reservoir, and that's needed by about 2030. Chapter 8 discusses operations and maintenance. So we talk about staffing and our operator certificates. Based on what we have in our system, we require a water treatment plant operator. We have one of those on staff, so we're good there. We discussed the system operation and then various emergencies and how we would respond to them. Chapter 9 is the system improvements, and those are what necessary improvements need to be done in the system. We have various water main improvements, main replacement, sort of things like that. We have facility improvements, and those are the transmission line upgrade that we talked about, the additional reservoir, and then the additional wells. We have some miscellaneous improvements, and those are essentially your planning items like the update of this plan and some other requirements for a water system. And then there's a schedule and costing information. Chapter 10 is the financial analysis. Essentially covers the projects and annual costs. And then Megan helped me prepare the table. It wasn't in the plan version that you have, but it'll be in the next one. And I know it's hard to read on my slide, but essentially the system is able to be funded with relatively little issue. The appendices are as required by Department of Health. There's one in particular, the water use efficiency program. I'll talk about that in the next presentation because there's a separate action that needs to be taken for that. So I won't do that here. We went to Planning Commission with this. They approved as presented. They had pretty limited questions. The biggest questions they had to do with our rate structure and kind of some recent changes we made to it and that sort of thing. So in summary, we have sufficient water rights. Our capacity will be sufficient with the transmission line and intertie projects. Storage will be sufficient with the additional reservoir. There's a recommendation for additional city sources. These will both bolster the supply and then also provide an independent supply from the intertie. And then financially, the system can be paid for reasonably. If there's any questions, I'd be happy to answer.
Thank you, Mark. All right.
I still can't figure out.
Council Deputy Mayor Johnson.
Mr. Herzeg, did I lose you?
I'm here.
Oh, I lost you on my screen. Hang on. All good news. 350 pages of good news. And Ms. Erdman, for whatever reason, we have a problem in the city of telling good news. There are people in this community who think we're going to die of thirst tomorrow because the city cannot, for whatever reason, put out the good news. We have, Mr. Herzig, because I read through it because I like water, I like sewer. There's water to 2040, right? As far as I can see.
Yeah.
Taking every new house that may come along, there's water to 2040. Is that correct, sir?
Yeah, with those improvements, we'll be fine to 2040.
And for whatever reason, we can't tell that story. And it irritates me greatly because there are a lot of people who hate their new neighbors because they think they're drinking their water. And so please, once this is done, let's put it out there online so folks can look at the water plan to say that the 7 people in the city council and the 85 people in the city have actually thought beyond tomorrow about bringing water to the city, please. Secondly, do we own the property for the 1.5 million gallons reservoir that is needed down the line?
Very, very likely. So the first step will be siting the reservoir, and it's likely to end up on the hill with the other reservoirs besides the Horse Thief one. So unless that study for some reason changes that location, which isn't likely, we do own the property.
And then Mr. Drone or Chief Sorensen, if you're still with us, if something were to happen like Paradise, California, is there enough water in the system to man the fire lines? In your estimation, gentlemen?
Yes.
Okay.
Now, there's always, a volume of fire that we're going to have difficulty dealing with. But Paradise, California is kind of a different demographic than we're dealing with.
Okay, so my only concern is that we're surrounded by big Doug fir trees. And if that were to come to us, we have enough to fight the fire.
Yes, our system is evaluated for that, and it meets our needs.
Thank you. And then last, Mr. Herzig, fluoridation. If we believe what we read, we've been told that was voted on by the people in the 1960s. And we have that documentation somewhere in the bowels of the building.
I have not seen it personally, but that is my understanding.
So Ms. Erdman, if you would do us a favor, perhaps in the next week or two, because I did see in the water plan from the 1950s, all the water right documentation. It was in there. So if there was truly a fluoridation vote in the 1960s, I'm sure the people down in Vancouver, the elections department, can source that. Can we figure out if it was voted on by the people, or if one day we just woke up and decided on the advice of our dentist to put fluoride in the water? Perfect. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Mr. Herzig.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Johnson. Anybody else from council? Councilmember DeRochers.
I just wanted to add to what Deputy Mayor Johnson just said, that last time we talked about this, it'd be about a $30,000 savings a year if we eliminated the fluoride from the water. So I am interested in looking if it was actually voted on and what we would need to do for that.
Thank you, Councilwoman DeRochers. Councilman Munson.
Thank you, Mayor Cortez. Mark, I did not get to go through all those pages because for whatever reason, this iPad that I got from the city couldn't handle that much memory. So I'm gonna have to finish reading your plan on a different computer later this week. So thankfully this is the first presentation, but I want to talk for a moment about wells 7 and 8. In your slides, you mentioned something about possibly a relocation as an option. But with the plethora of wetlands and watershed that we have here, really, is it feasible to hire somebody to come out to do a land study to see what very minimal inventory we have is just to punch another 2 holes in the ground to pull heavy water out to continually have these problems? I mean, is it really feasible, or was that just added in there as a one of the options?
So it's an option. So it's kind of a 2-part option. So if we do it in the same location, it would only be if technology makes it make sense. So right now, when we're down there pulling out water, there's just so much iron in there that while we treat it up at the surface and can get rid of it for drinking water purposes, it gums up the screens down in the ground. And so if and I've heard talk about new technologies to prevent that from happening. I don't think they're perfected yet, so it wouldn't be something we jump on today. but technology changes quickly. So if there's something that makes sense that would be cost effective to do that, I do think it could make sense, because there is a lot of water down in that aquifer. We have the rights to do it. And if we can do it cheaper than, getting it from CPU, but we would want the technology, so we're not throwing our money away. So that's the first part of it. The second would be is that CPU has some of these wells in the same aquifer just outside of the city, and they don't run into the same issues that we do. So there are parts of the aquifer that don't have as much iron and wouldn't have the same issue. They just happen to be outside of the city limits at this point. So part of that discussion would be, is there a way to work with CPU to either, build a city-owned well outside, or transfer the rights to them, have them build a well that they and get credits against what we get from Paradise Point or something like that. So, they're all kind of initial things that we would have to talk about in the future, but those are kind of the two concepts related to that.
Okay, so if we have that discussion, then we're always going to keep in the back of our mind, I hope, about Paradise Point and the cost to connect to that for an endless supply versus continuing to throw money at the wells, right?
Yeah, it would be you would have to compare the cost across the board, the little bit higher cost to get money from them versus the, treatment and various issues we have. So again, that technology would have to, be cheap and be an improvement where it would make it financially feasible.
All right, thank you, Mr. Hursak.
Thank you, Councilmember Munson. Anybody else? Okay, seeing none. The only thing I'll add to what Mr. Johnson said is, yes, it would be great to get the water plan online, available to the public. However, it is quite a dense piece of reading. And so if we can provide it easier for consumption for the public, it would be good to share our story. I agree with Mr. Johnson. So, all right. Moving forward, Mark, your last item here. So this is our water use efficiencies goals. This will be a presentation by Mr. Hursak again.
I'm not going to give a PowerPoint at this point because I can't figure out how to turn my screen off. So this one's pretty straightforward. So one of the requirements with the water system plan is that you have a water use efficiency program. And the goal of that program is essentially to get people to use less water from the system. And so in our previous water system plan, we essentially set two goals. The first was to reduce the average ERU, annual water consumption, by a minimum 1%. So what an ERU is essentially when you have a household, how much water they use on a daily basis. And so our goal was to eliminate 2 gallons per day from that. The second item was to reduce our distribution system leakage to under 10%. When we did the plan back in 2014, we were actually significantly over that 10% requirement. So based on what's happened between 2014 and 2020, we've actually reduced our ERU usage by 8.7%, which was well exceeding the goal we had of 1%. And our 3-year rolling average for the distribution system leakage is down to 7.9%. So again, well under the 10% requirement. So the two goals that we're proposing are pretty similar to those previous goals, and that's to reduce the equivalent residential unit consumption by an additional 1%, and then to maintain that DSL for less than 10% for the next 10 years. On top of those goals, there's some measures that are required. The mandatory measures include meters at our sources, meters at all of our services, meter calibration. So all three of those things, we've got all of our sources metered, all of our services metered, and we do calibration of the meters. The fourth is a water loss control action plan. That's only required for systems that are over the 10% DSL. Since we are not, we don't have to do that. And then the last is customer education. And we do that through quite a few sources. We have our consumer confidence report, our website, our Conserva-meter sign, those sorts of things. There's measures that must be evaluated. One of those is being the rate structure. A few years back, we switched to a system where we reward conservation. The less units you use, the less you pay per unit. So we've met that requirement. They want you to look at reclamation opportunities. At this point, we don't have any in the city, but if those ever do come up, that's something that we can look at. And then we have to select a handful of measures. The first being water bill showing consumption history, which is done. Having water use ordinances, we have that in place. So if there ever is a water emergency, needs to conserve water, we can do that. Conservation rates, and that's kind of what we talked about. The way our rates are set up, they reward conserving water. Advertising, which we do through the Conserva-meter signs, website, those sorts of things. And then targeted marketing, which includes some of the stuff that Bonnie does with Facebook notices, press release, and those sorts of things. So based on all of that, that is our proposed program. As I mentioned, the state wants to see this as a separate adoption from the water system plan. So this is what we've proposed doing, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
All right, council. Deputy Mayor Johnson.
One more, Mr. Mayor, if I may. Mark,
Yes.
We were sold years ago the electronic water meters. Have they done what they promised us they would do?
Absolutely. So part of that getting down below 10% is having more accurate meters. And so we're not losing those sorts of things at our services.
So are those meters calibrated or once they're in, or is there a calibration over the years?
There is a calibration over the years. So all the state requires is that we do it per manufacturer's recommendation. And so that's what we've been doing.
Okay, and that can be done from the truck going by, or is that opening up the box and dinking around with it?
I believe it's opening up the box and messing with it and having ways to test it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Johnson. Anybody else? Councilmember Munson.
Thank you, Mayor Cortez. Mark, on the water conservation program that you said that there was some kind of award or whatever. So what are we doing to entice the conservation? What are we?
So it's in terms of our rates. So before we adjusted the rates, you used to get some units with your base charge. Now you pay your base charge, but then you also pay for what you use. And so at the lower usage, you pay a lower rate. So it's essentially $1.80. As you move up, then you have to pay $2.57 per unit. And then as you get above that, you actually pay $4.12 a unit. So essentially those that can stay within sort of a prescribed area pay less per unit of water, which they've found actually encourages because you're not paying as much.
Okay, so a couple of years ago when we were talking about water rates and we were talking about this conservation program, two items were brought up. One was for the intake of the water and educating the public, because I asked a question about can you use water reclamation barrels from rainwater and things of that nature. And I know in some municipalities that they don't allow that, but we found that we did allow that here. So that I think the other part of that conversation was the with the rainwater, how it washes down in our system and creates a bunch of issues in the winter time, how it leaks out through the sewer pipes and things of that nature. But going back to the water catch basin system, I think we had a discussion, and I don't know if I'm going to get it completely right, about the rewards or award program and how it will lessen the demand on water, especially during peak times, if people knew that they could do that. Are we looking at any kind of programs to educate the public on how to utilize it, especially in the last 2 years since we've seen people, gardening has been in the uptick with a lot of people at home, things like that. Just a little bit of knowledge can go a long way.
No, it makes sense. And that's something that I believe our storm department's been working on, because that it's one of those places where it overlaps. It provides lessening use of our water system, but it's also a stormwater treatment type of thing. And so our stormwater guys have kind of handled that. And so they've been working on items to share with the public. And I don't remember off the top of my head if that's on our website, but it very much makes sense to me because you get sort of, two wins for one thing. So yeah, that's something we can encourage.
All right, thank you, Mr. Ursay.
All right, thank you, Councilmember Munson. Anybody else? All right, seeing none, we'll go ahead and move on. Thank you, Mr. Hersig, for those series of presentations. That concludes our business portion. Now moving on to our administrative reports. I'll turn it over to our city manager.
Thank you, Mayor Cortez. We just have a few tonight. First up is the mowing. We passed the resolution back, was it last in 2020, regarding the mowing along 502, 503. Staff did an evaluation. According to the resolution, currently we're supposed to be mowing the section of 502, 503 intersection south to Eaton twice a month for the months of April, June, August, and October. We are into October. We were evaluating it last week to do the second round, and that grass has pretty much gone dormant. So we would like to utilize staffing in other areas, but we wanted to run that by you guys first and make sure that was okay. Mr. Hersig and I both have visited the area as well as Public Works staff, and it seems to be looking pretty good. So I just wanted to get the okay on that. Otherwise, if you guys would like, we will send the crews back out there. It's about a day and a half worth of work to do that section, or about a day of work, I guess. So
Deputy Mayor Johnson.
Well, the general idea of that was to not overwinter with knee-high grass.
Yeah.
And so, Ms. Erman, if you're saying that, and I believe the resolution talks about the fact to your satisfaction. So if you're telling us that you're satisfied that there's no knee-high grass or any of that there, then I don't know why we shouldn't take your word for it. So I have no problems with that. It was just for the fact that in the past years, we've overwintered with knee-high grass. That was
yeah. Right. Well, we will revert the crews and get the labor elsewhere throughout the city. Thank you. And then last but not least, we have a subdivision, two subdivisions actually, in an area that we recently annexed to the city. I'm going to pull up this map really quickly. So 244th and Northwest 20th Avenue, we're looking at the development of the Walker Fields and the Mirasong properties. This has gone through preliminary approval. It's gone through the hearings examiner and has the final order. One of the questions that is being appealed right now, there's several items on the transportation side that the developer has appealed. Several of them are for intersection spacing within the subdivision that was denied. And the biggest one is this construction of 15th Avenue. So currently 15th comes off of Northwest Onsdorf through this subdivision. Amirasong is one of the subdivisions in question, and it would extend it through here. This would be the future connection so that it connects up to 244th Street. There is quite a bit of wetlands in this area. However, the impact for the street itself is not huge. It's just in this small section here. In working with the developer, they have appealed this decision to the hearings examiner. I have sat down, Mark and I have met with them several times talking through this. They didn't feel it was appropriate to build the road because it doesn't have a direct connection to them. I don't know if this shares, did the screen switch for you guys as well to show?
Yes.
Okay. So this is what the plat looks like, but we are still requiring this construction so that we have the cross connection within the street. After talking with them, they've appealed the decision to the hearing examiner. We've put a rebuttal together. I think we're on good ground, but to ensure that we get the construction of the road, one thing that we've talked to the developer about is the city doing the permitting and the mitigation for the wetland piece and having the developer construct 15th Avenue. So this would be very similar to what we did with TJ Fontenette over by the storage facility. So we wanted to bring this forward to you to see what your thoughts are. I think this is a very good plan and a way that we can ensure that the construction of that road happens. Otherwise, if it does get appealed, that would be left up to the hearings examiner. So I will stop this share and kind of turn it back over to you guys if you have any questions or concerns, and we'll ultimately be looking at getting the nod to move ahead, because to do this, it would require us to put together a development agreement with a timeline like we did with Mr. Fonbeck. So.
Okay. Councilmember Munson.
Thank you, Mayor Cortez. Aaron, how much is that permit going to cost us? We paid 40,000, wasn't it, to do the one with TJ that we ended up letting lapse? How much is this one?
So that one didn't lapse. It is being constructed. We did extend the development agreement for that because there was 2 other subdivisions that came in, so we could do the entire construction all together, which gave us a better product. This one will be a little bit more, we're guessing, but not too much different. I think Mark had indicated around 60, 70 maybe.
Yeah, so the last one we spent about 50,000 between the consultant and the mitigation. I did a rough estimate of the fill and it's actually pretty similar. So my guess is we'd be similar consultant cost and then slightly more on the mitigation. So probably in the $60,000 to $70,000 range.
All right, thank you.
Councilmember Bowman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Ms. Erdman, when you've met with them since our meeting with them, is that correct?
That's correct, yeah.
And are they agreeable to this?
Yeah, we met last week. We floated the idea after we met when you were there. We floated the idea to them. They took a little bit of time to think about it. We met late last week and they were in agreement. So if you guys are on board, we will move forward with putting together the development agreement.
Okay.
And they have made adjustments to the intersection spacing, so that would take the appeal off the table.
Okay, so I think to lay it out there, if we say no, let's go to a hearing examiner and the hearing examiner rules in their favor, then we're building that road eventually in the future and we're paying for it anyways. Or if they agree to it, they don't go to the hearings examiner, we pay for the mitigation of that road and they build it. So I don't know why we, either way, we're paying for mitigation of that road. So why would we not just do it and allow them to build it if they agree to that?
All right. Anybody else? Okay, seeing none. Council, what direction do we want to give Ms. Erdman in terms of this? Consensus, thumbs up? Consensus, thumbs down? Okay, I'm seeing 2, 3. What are we looking like, folks? Thumbs down, thumbs down, thumbs down. All right.
Mr. Mayor, I would suggest we may want to take a formal motion.
Yeah,
particular issue, with the motion being whether or not the city has authority to move forward with a development agreement to pay for the mitigation costs of the road with the developer to construct.
okay. If somebody would be willing to make a motion.
So moved.
Okay, I have a motion on the floor by Mr. Bowman. Do I have a second?
Second.
And a second by Deputy Mayor Johnson. If I can get the city clerk, please take a roll call vote.
Councilmember Walters,
No.
Councilmember Bowman,
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Johnson,
Yes.
Mayor Cortez,
Yes.
Councilmember Davis,
No.
Councilmember DeRocher,
Yes.
and Councilmember Munson.
No.
All right, Aaron, you have your direction.
Right, thank you very much. And that concludes administrative reports for the evening.
Thank you so much. Okay, moving on to our next item, council communications. Council. All right, seeing none, move ahead. Council, we have a closed session this evening. So pursuant to RCW 42.30.140, City Council will adjourn into a closed door session for contract negotiations for approximately 15 minutes with action to be taken. So council, you should each have a link, and I will see you in about a minute or two. All right. All right, council. Councilmember Bowman.
Mayor, I'd like to move to authorize the city manager to sign the contract with the Battleground Police Department.
Second.
Mr. Johnson, oh, he's in now. We got it.
Okay. So I have a motion on the floor by Councilmember Bowman, and I have a second by Councilmember Walters. If I can have the city clerk, please take a roll call vote.
Councilmember Munson,
Yes.
Councilmember DeRocher,
Yes.
Councilmember Davis,
Yes.
Mayor Cortez,
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Johnson,
Yes.
Councilmember Bowman,
Yes.
and Councilmember Walters.
Yes.
All right, motion passes unanimously. All right, last item of the evening, council. You will be receiving roughly tomorrow. We are moving forward with the city manager evaluation, annual performance evaluation, and you'll be receiving an email at my direction from the city attorney. That will be an email to provide your input on the city manager's performance. I'm going to ask that you return or complete it, and it's returned back to me by no later than November 16th. So that should give you just a hair over 2 weeks. If I don't get it by November 16th, it will not be included in the performance review. So again, I need it by November 16th to be included in the performance review. If you have any questions at all, feel free to reach out to me or reach out to our city attorney with that. And with that, our next meeting is November 15th, 2021. Meeting begins promptly at 7 p.m. Everybody have a safe week, and I'll see you next.